As I mentioned at the top of the show, I love my job. And I have always loved my job, and I consider my job to be the single greatest job in the country. That said, a day like today is something special. I hope that members of Congress, and particularly the leadership in Congress, recognizes that open hearings before the cameras are really, really important for the country in terms of dealing with even the most controversial issues, in terms of airing out complex stuff and stuff that we're fighting about as citizens and as partisans and as independents and voters and non-voters. When it's stuff that really matters to the country, airing it out, having us all have the same information is a really solid basis for us to move forward with a higher level conversation, a more constructive debate, and enables us all to be better citizens. So I'm super glad that Congress held these open hearings. I hope these are the first of many. I'm ready to hear from every single member of Mueller's team who will agree to come before them. But being able to talk about this tonight just feels like a real privilege. So thanks for being here. That does it for me tonight. We will see you again tomorrow. Now it's time for The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. And I love your job, and it's the most important job in the world to me because it makes this job so much easier following you. Your point is so important about what today's hearings represent and what future hearings could be. And hearing from the Mueller team, as many members of the Mueller team as possible, is really important. There was a team, as you know, working exclusively on Volume 1. There was another team working exclusively on Volume 2. They have such a command of the detail of everything in that investigation and their own reactions to it that would be so invaluable to be hearing.
Especially, I think, today, now that we have heard from Robert Mueller. I mean, obviously, this special counsel's office probably could not have been convened and could not have sustained itself to the completion of its final report under anyone other than somebody like Robert Mueller with the reputation for integrity and rigor that he had accomplished, that he had grown over the course of his decades in public service. It maybe had to be Robert Mueller who is the named special counsel, but it's clear from his performance today that he definitely didn't do all this work himself. And there were times when clearly the report felt like the work of his staff and not his. And he was, taking it for granted that whatever the member of Congress was reading to him from the report must be in the report. He didn't necessarily have in mind that he had the whole thing in his head. All the more reason for us to hear from the members of his team who did the work, particularly when the details of the work and the decision-making behind it is really important in terms of what we still don't understand as a country.
I mean, I think the best version of a hearing is a minimum of 4 of these staff people, 2 from Volume 1, say 2 from Volume 2. And when the question's asked, they can actually decide which one is the best one to answer it, who has the best information for it. They can kind of tag team on answers, all in the interest of creating the best possible well of information that the Congress can have.
Exactly. And I'm sure the prosecutors and the FBI special agents who worked with Robert Mueller are cringing hearing us talk about this if they haven't already turned us off, because I'm sure it's the last thing they want to do. But I think, honestly, if you spent the last 22 months working with Robert Mueller on this critical issue of national importance, I'm sure you do not want Robert Mueller's testimony today to be the last word that anybody ever hears on this issue from your team. I'm sure you do not want this to revert to, Attorney General Barr mischaracterizing your findings and the president calling it names and all those things. I mean, to the extent that the work doesn't speak for itself, and I think we all know that it doesn't, and that the people who created this work product and did this investigation do need to help us understand its implications and what still needs to be revealed, the other people on that team are going to have to do it. Their service is not yet over, and I'm sure they would love it to be, but they all need to help the country understand what they've been through.
One thing I'm glad about is the apparent detail of negotiation that Robert Mueller went through in scheduling these hearings and demanding a time limit to each one of the hearings, because what that seemed to do today was force discipline on both sides. And forget about the content of how they used their minutes. What is absolutely clear about it is that each side was very disciplined in the way they were approaching this. The bombast was greatly reduced on the Republican side, but the talking points were still the same. It was like there were 2 different hearings, the Democratic hearing and the Republican hearing. But certainly on the Democratic side, where they were very interested in getting all of the information they possibly could from the report out there on the table, the discipline was something I haven't seen the likes of that in House committee hearings in a very long time.
Yeah, and that's not to say that it was, I think that's right. That's not to say that it was, that everybody covered themselves in glory. I mean, there was definitely some speechifying and some people who were reading a very carefully drawn set of questions, but they weren't very good readers. And when Mueller gave them unexpected answers, they didn't know where to pick back up in their questions, and then they didn't, you know, they're putting the wrong emphasis on the right syllable, right? Yeah, you definitely had a little bit of embarrassment stuff there. You had a few funny conspiracy theories from a couple of Republican members. There really was a Republican member who complained that Fox News was not cited enough as a source in the Mueller report, which for me was kind of a laugh out loud moment. I mean, there were some moments of ridiculousness, but I think the chairman of those two committees led in a way that was very instructive, very helpful. Both Nadler and Schiff themselves covered so much ground so expertly and nimbly at the very start, at the very onset of each of those hearings. I do think it helped, and I do think that today's hearing just was an exercise in public education that is going to make us smarter as a polity and is going to make us deal with this issue in a way that's way more substantive than where we've been.
We'll see where we go from here. We have two members of the committees joining us in this hour. We're going to have a lot of help analyzing what went on today.
Great. Thanks, Lance. I look forward to it.
Thank you, Rachel.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.